This video is intended for educational purposes. Opinions made by me or the Sage Seeds AI are not investment advice. Today we're going to validate the Sage Seeds' artificial intelligence ranking for Origin Agritech, a agriculture technology company. To validate, we're going to walk through the 2023 annual report of Origin Agritech. Again, this is the most recent available report. We know that our in-house AI is recommending this as a strong sell, but our job is to validate what is the fundamental reason behind the numbers, unpack what we discover, and essentially confirm or reject what the AI is seeing. Talk to each other, like and subscribe, share with your friends, and let's dive in so that your wisdom can blush. Luckily, the CFO department has created a table to break down advances to suppliers. This year compared to last year, we can see how many millions, tens of millions of renminbi have now gone to prepaying for purchasing seed. This is an agriculture technology company. This could be completely fine, but it always catches a financial analyst's eye to see anything swinging by 3-4 times in a single year. There had to be a lot of preparation in making a move of this size and scale. Being in the business of agriculture, Origin Agritech has set up amortization schedules for technology rights for licensed seeds. Now, unfortunately, I'm not 100% clear. It hasn't explicitly been said whether seeds in the other section is exactly the same as licensed seeds in this section. But either way, here we see that whenever they buy a seed, they estimate that it could have a useful life as short as 3 years or as long as 20 years. That's quite a range to wrap our heads around. Luckily, the Chief Financial Office has created this table of net acquired intangible assets, and I'd like to focus on 2 rows of this table in order to help wrap our head around this seed business. First row, technology rights for licensed seeds, the same thing we just looked at, but also look at the second row, accumulated amortization. Comparing these 2 rows this year compared to last year, I'm noticing that this year might be, for the first time ever, a year in which accumulated amortization is higher than the book value of remaining technology rights. A year ago, these technology rights had a higher value than the accumulated amortization. That is no longer the case in the latest year. So what does that mean? Well, in the business of seeds, we have to boil down to, are we going to have a positive return on investment for each seed that we purchase? Typically, a calculation of that nature would use the value of your rights minus the value of accumulated amortization. Since for the first time ever, that number is now a negative number, well, that typical usual return on investment calculation has to be thrown away. You need to find an alternative as a director in this business, an alternative calculation in order to figure out how many seeds to invest in. In my mind, these things are very related to the 3 times, almost 4 times more advances to suppliers for purchasing seeds. That very big swing is happening in the exact same time period that accumulated amortization has exceeded remaining technology rights. I don't think those 2 things are a coincidence. Whatever the management of this business is doing now to calculate how many seeds to buy, it is the first year, very likely, that they are using that new calculation because they need to. They can no longer use what they teach in business schools, intangible asset minus amortization. And so we have a very large swing in investment into seeds, a big swing of sorts. We need to understand, what could this business be thinking before and during this move? For that purpose, I have found us a little bit of history, a brief history lesson in what this business is. A first private seed company in China, Origin Agritech. It's corn, a corn seed company. A product pipeline consisted of genetically modified corn seeds that have phytase and glyphosate tolerant traits. In other words, some of this genetically modified corn developed by Origin Agritech does have natural resistance to insects and resistance against droughts, as well as growing quadruple stacked cobs instead of whatever currently happens now, I guess. As recently as 2021, changes to seed law have significantly improved protection for various patents that Origin Agritech believes strengthen its ability to enter the global biotechnology market. Post-pandemic, this Chinese domestic business thinks that non-Chinese countries might finally be at a point where they'll start to respect the patents that they have developed. And so let's start to look through some of the patents that are relevant today. today, 4 commercial hybrids of phytase trait corn have been submitted to the Chinese government to obtain safety certificates. Origin Agritech is waiting for the final approval from the Chinese government. When it comes to glyphosate tolerance, these varieties of corn have had their test results submitted to the Chinese government. Insect-resistant corn has had their results submitted to the Chinese government. Finally, the triple stack trait corn is ready for commercialization, but before they can make a single cent on it, Origin Agritech does need to submit an application for Chinese government approval in due course. And this is really not uncommon when it comes to technology companies in the Chinese market. This is seeming like a classic case of what I have called the Chinese innovation trap. Origin Agritech seeks to become the leader in biotechnology and genetically modified commercialization in China. They believe there are encouraging signs of greater public acceptance of genetically modified crop seeds. Therefore, the development of biotechnology remains one of the business's core strategies. However, technology companies in China are often prohibited or restricted in being able to market their own products, despite the fact that formally or informally, many government approval processes very much take public opinion into account. And so if you're a company in the agriculture technology business like Origin Agritech, you're stuck in a circular kind of rut. You'll need government approval in order to be able to market your new innovation to the public in order to gain acceptance, but you can only gain that government approval if enough of the public already accepts you. It is not uncommon at all for Chinese technology companies to get stuck in this circle for years and years and years. We need to figure out if this company is going to survive long enough to actually begin to market itself and escape this purgatory period of needing state-sponsored joint ventures in order to sell anything at all. As we uncover more details about where they are at in the process of this journey, hopefully it also gives us insight into why they're swinging so big with buying almost 4 times as much seed this year as they did last year. Let's keep digging. At this point, I think it's very important to bring up that Origin Agritech's independent auditors have issued reports with a going concern statement. A going concern statement is pretty bad. It's when the independent auditor feels that it would be irresponsible not to tell potential investors that this company might not survive the next 12 months. Now you can imagine that auditors don't like to issue these. It's kind of, for lack of a better simplification, just bad for business straight up. And so auditors really don't issue these going concern statements unless it's pretty bad. Yet despite that, I find it quite interesting to note that Origin Agritech's auditors have issued going concern statements each of the last 3 reports. As far back as 2021, 2022, 2023, every single time the auditors warning that the company might not survive 12 months. Now, they've survived this way for 3 years, and that is unusual. Typically, companies either go out of business or get out of their danger. It's not often you see going concern statements issued year after year after year. Genetically modified seed products are controversial. Only recently, the Chinese government has begun to issue genetically modified crop safety certificates, and the Chinese government has started to encourage food independence as a country at the national level. Some important context is that post-pandemic, food independence has shot up to become a major talking point in official Chinese government rhetoric. Origin Agritech believes that this change in rhetoric will increasingly favor their genetically modified food products, as they think they have a good argument to state that their corn provides better yield and can accommodate the changing climate through things like their drought-resistant traits, for example. The Chinese consumers' continued reluctance to embrace genetically modified food, according to Origin Agritech, can be chalked up to the relative novelty and uncertainty in government regulation, a whole risk factor that says it as directly as possible. The degree of public acceptance or perceived public acceptance can affect our operations. What was going through directors' heads when they decided to swing so big towards buying lots and lots of seeds in this last year? The first year in which their return on investment calculations had to be thrown out the window. A little bit more history lesson in order to finally put the pieces together. I think it's relevant that in 2019, Origin Agritech entered into a cooperation framework agreement with an entity owned by the government of Changping District, Beijing City. Changping is kind of the biggest office district. It's also the district that has Origin Agritech's company headquarters. Under this agreement, the local government of Beijing City gained a 51% ownership of all the business that Origin Agritech conducts in Beijing. At this time, and for multiple decades prior to this, Beijing was, and kind of still is, Origin Agritech's primary market for selling their seed technology. In addition, Origin Agritech was forced, for lack of a better word, I'm simplifying a bit, but coerced into contributing the headquarters building, giving up their lease, and the majority of office buildings in Beijing are typically actually owned by the local government. And so the local government of Shangping district saying, give us 51% of your local business, also give us your office building, and continue to pay us as your landlords for that office building that now belongs to us. If that were not bad enough, over the 3 years following that cooperation framework, Shangping district slowly invested about 137.7 million renminbi. This apparently triggers something in the agreement, some sort of secondary deal that has been completed and approved by government officials. As a result, as recently as August 2023, just a few months ago, the local government of Shangping and something called the Beijing Origin State Harvest Biotechnology Limited has split ownership that used to belong to Origin Agritech with an entity named Hainan Aoju, a name that doesn't mean much to me. I did look it off in a separate window. Hainan Aoju is a registered subsidiary of Origin Agritech, registered in Hainan province, a completely different province. However, it does seem to have political ties to Beijing Agriculture University. So let's back up and review this saga in simpler terms. There's all sorts of conversations we're missing, all sorts of little things that probably matter in the courts. But let's focus just on this. In 2018, most of Origin Agritech sales happened in or around Beijing City. Now, 5 years later, a little more than 5 years later, in 2024, none of Origin Agritech sales at the top level happen in Beijing City. It has completely lost its largest market. Instead, it has a strange pact with Beijing Agriculture University in order to argue about how much of a 47% interest it has, while 51% of the interest in that Beijing market has for sure been given up to the local government of Shangping district. Not uncommon in China for this sort of stuff to happen. Origin Agritech has had its largest market completely taken away from them in exchange for some money that barely covered enough to repay the bank loan of the headquarters building, which they were forced to give up, and a little bit of working capital. Again, in exchange for this little bit of working capital, Origin Agritech no longer has access to their largest market. However, it is locked into having to supply certain of its seed technology assets to an entity that, I'm embellishing here, I guess, they probably didn't even want to create in the first place. And moving now to how the financial office is recording this disposal, this loss of their Beijing market. The relevant row on this table is actually disposal gain of the deconsolidating Beijing Origin. And here we see that after paying off that headquarters, receiving the money from the local government and the University of Beijing, overall Origin Agritech was paid a little over 40 million renminbi as part of this cooperation framework. Back at the cash flow statement, the difference in advances to suppliers is roughly around 37 million renminbi. That's roughly how much additional money they spent on seeds precisely in the year when their return on investment calculation must have broken down. All in all, this decision to swing big, coupled with the little story that we've discovered about their Beijing market, what was originally their core market, bringing it all together, we see that this company has gone through the political game, frankly, relatively unscathed. It can get far worse than this. I've seen it be far worse than this. They actually walked away with tens of millions of renminbi, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily find myself being too mature if I was given a check while losing so much or feeling like I was losing so much in return. And on top of all of it, amortization just happens to be ticking higher than the remaining valuation of technology rights for licensed seeds precisely at the same time period in which this is happening. And so the ROI calculation breaks down. You have to come up with a different ROI calculation. You're reeling from having your business ripped out from you. I'm starting to get the feeling that this management allowed themselves to throw the entire check they received for Beijing Origin into prepayments for purchasing seed, possibly for emotional reasons. Apparently they had suppliers that were all too willing to let them spend this money. But what is it that they're gaining? I'm still not sure after everything we've been looking through, but I can see how frustrating it must have been to have to figure this out precisely as the Beijing Origin situation resolved in what I imagine was a very unsatisfactory satisfying way. And remember, this company is still in the growth stage. Now looking at its income statement, gross profit growth is slowing down, but still positive. But the losses from operations are still negative, substantially less negative than they were just a couple years ago. And so this company is at a very sensitive point in life, at a point where its time is running out. The auditors have called it a risk as a going concern, issuing going concern statements. It doesn't take a genius to realize that this is precisely the worst time to get emotional and swing big for anything other than a premeditated, calculated execution. I'm not getting the feeling that that's what this tripling, almost quadrupling in seed purchases was, but at the same time, what must be being seen by Wall Street? Well, assuming they lose a similar 15 million, say 20 million even in renminbi next year, well, shifting to the balance sheet, this going concern risk could cover that just with the cash that it has on hand. They have almost 24 million renminbi on cash on hand. And so even though the auditors are saying that this company might not be open in 12 months and have been for several years saying that, this is what I would call kind of the most frustrating version of a going concern warning, where this business is just barely a going concern risk and is actually pretty confidently able to maintain itself even though it is still losing money. And so a corn seed business that has figured out how to genetically modify, they seem to be really good at it, even going so far as to having something called nutrition enhanced corn, possibly very important products for the future, but that is stuck in this regulatory limbo, which is very, very common for technology companies in this part of the world. But in a less common circumstance, they have punted a payoff from the Changping district, or giving up the ownership of their core market, taking that money, pushing it into giant levels of purchases for them. What's going to happen to all of that new seed that they've purchased? Well, they seem to be somewhat emotionally, in my opinion, insisting that they can sell that outside of China, that if this is how things are going to happen to them in their domestic market, that they need to go big on escaping their domestic market. Nice in theory, maybe helpful emotionally, but I'm not seeing any concrete analysis of why they think they should do that and why they think now is the time, other than they received this $40 million check, had it lying around, and they're just sick of it. However, we need to see if we are going to rubber stamp this heavy sell signal from the Sage Seeds artificial intelligence, and I'm not convinced. The reason being that there's this long list of patents, any one of which, if the Chinese government decides to approve, could create new revenue very quickly for Origin Agritech. Now, as a heavy sell rating, I'd assume that the only way we would act on this Sage Seeds artificial intelligence ranking is to short Origin Agritech stock. I'm not sure I'm comfortable shorting when there are this many potential patent approvals that could happen essentially any day now. I'm proud of the Sage Seeds artificial intelligence for identifying this, for labeling it a heavy sell, but I think this shorting opportunity would really be best for an investor who has a strong understanding of the regulatory environment of China, specifically the agriculture and labor regulatory environment of China. I don't think that investor is me. I find it hard to imagine how I would become certain to do that. I don't think I can rubber stamp this trade suggested by the Sage Seeds artificial intelligence as a heavy sell. At the end of the day, I'm sure someone will be able to stay closer to this and figure out if Origin Agritech's time actually will run out at some point. But until then, one thing's for sure, and the local government of Changping district is going to say that they sold all sorts of genetically modified corn, get credit for increasing the food independence of Beijing City, get their pats on the back from the national government, I'm sure. Meanwhile, the result of Origin Agritech's big swing into selling seeds anywhere but China will have to play out however it plays out. An interesting situation and an interesting walkthrough, in my opinion. Let me know if you think I've missed something or misinterpreted. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next walkthrough.